I'm Jill Shaw, and this is Catalyst for Change, brought to you by the Shah Family Foundation. I'm here today with Andrew Yang, who recently ran for President of the United States and currently runs Move Humanity Forward, which advocates for universal basic income, human-centered capitalism, and data as a property right. He's been a critical supporter of President-elect Joe Biden and has just announced that he will be moving to Georgia to help the Democrats who are still running in a runoff for 2 Senate seats in January. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Jill, and thank you for your incredible work in the community. I love the trial in Chelsea. I love folks who are working on education innovation. So it's great to connect.
It's so great to have you here. It's really nice to meet you. We probably should start with the obvious. Tell us a little bit about your opinion about what happened over the last week with the election and what's going on right now.
Thrilled. Joe's our president-elect. Thank goodness.
Yay!
The national nightmare of Trumpism is, well, Trumpism, unfortunately, is not dead,
Yeah.
but Trump will be our president. I mean, so that's a phenomenal place to start.
Right.
The work we're doing, I think, is more important than ever, Jill, in that we have to face facts that over 70 million Americans decided to re-up with Trump. And that include maybe 5 million voters who didn't vote for him last time in 2016. So you have to ask yourself, oh my gosh, 5 million Americans saw what happened over the last 4 years and said, I didn't vote last time, but now's my chance.
Now I'm going to
So,
double down. Yeah.
there's like a real uh, rot going on in many, many communities. And folks are just falling into despair. In an environment of despair, Trumpism is much more potent and powerful because if you lose hope and then someone gives you an expression of anger and breaking the system, then you're much more likely to take it. So
Mm.
I'm thrilled that Joe Biden is going to be our president very soon. But I'm deeply concerned about what this election says in terms of where our country is, because there are some negative trends that are getting stronger. And I feel like Joe and Kamala and the new administration have a lot of work to do if they're going to truly stem the rising tides of dysfunction and despair.
Andrew, do you think it was mostly people re-upping for Trump, or do you think it was more Republicans that just couldn't bring themselves to vote Democratic, even given who our leader currently is?
I talked to hundreds of, maybe thousands of Trump supporters on the trail. This was pre-COVID and when I was still running, and they had real concerns about President Trump. I mean, it's possible they still
Right.
decided to vote for him. After all is said and done, party allegiance is very powerful.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will hem and haw and then end up voting along party lines when when they get in there.
Right. Right.
Um, uh, but there were some people that said that they're going to just not vote this time, like that voted for Trump last time. They couldn't
Right.
bring themselves to vote for Trump. So I think when you dig through the numbers, you'll find that a lot of, I mean, he got 5 million more voters this time than
Yeah.
2016, and I think a lot of them were new. A lot of them were like, "This is, I affirmatively choose this."
Yeah. So you're headed down to Georgia now. What do you expect to happen down there over the next couple of months?
I think more and more energy is going to head into these Senate races, Jill, because the reality is if both of them go blue, then Mitch McConnell can no longer obstruct everything in the Senate. And if you
Right.
can imagine having a unified government and being able to get things done. So what is the value difference there? In my mind, the value difference there is immense in terms of human well-being. If you would put it into
Right.
numbers, it's probably maybe some trillions of dollars, even in terms of the gap between one government where you can actually get things done and another when you cannot. So hundreds of millions of dollars going to get poured into Georgia very quickly. The voter registration deadline is December 7th to register new voters. And then the election's January 5th. So it's a very compressed time frame. Two
Right.
Senate races on the same day. You can believe that. And that's why I'm heading there, because we have to try and deliver a Senate that Joe can work with and not have Mitch just saying no, no, no to everything. What a nightmare. We go through all this to get rid of Trump and then you still can't get anything done because of Mitch
Yeah,
McConnell.
no, absolutely.
So if you want to avoid that scenario, please do donate to John Ossoff or Reverend Warnock's campaigns. So I'm heading down there to volunteer and help out.
Great. So then what happens after January 5th for you?
Then I either join the administration if they think I can contribute something positive, or we just keep agitating for cash relief, which we're doing right now
Yeah.
through Humanity Forward. Or there are some other structural problems that I think I want to try and tackle. So I always have things to do, but if the administration wants me in a substantive role, I would definitely take it.
And so you're a huge proponent of UBI, and as are we. We're helping to run one of the largest guaranteed income programs
I
in the
know, and
country.
Chelsea. That's why I'm here and I love you, because I love everyone who's pro universal basic income and
Yeah.
actually do something about it. So thank
Yeah.
you so much.
No, it's we're so excited about it. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I feel like now we have to, like, we've
Now
kind
we
of
have.
like gone over the cliff, and right. And the time is now. And so, can you talk a little bit about whether you're in Washington or not? And I hope you are. Will UBI, do you think, be on the table regardless of whether people lean conservative or lean liberal, or do you feel like there's a long road to hoe before we get to a place where people are more accepting of this sort of solution?
Jill, it's so fascinating. Before I decided to run for president, I thought the big problem is that people have not heard of universal basic income, like that,
Right.
because most people hadn't heard of it. So I said, okay, let me remedy that.
Yeah.
Thanks to many incredible Americans who just threw their support behind me in the campaign. I think now most people have heard of universal basic income. And its approval rating just keeps going up and up and up, particularly with the
Right.
pandemic, unfortunately, as circumstances have worsened. Now 55% of Americans are actually for universal basic income, and 82% are for cash relief during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So there's now fairly widespread support for it. And in the Democratic Party, dozens of mayors have come out for this new Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, where you have the mayors of Los Angeles, Atlanta, St. Paul, Stockton, Compton, like around the country, Newark, saying that we think we have to have basic income and we're going to run a trial. So you can see this massive movement among Democratic mayors, many of
Right.
them, many of whom are black. So there's going to be this wellspring of support politically. On the Republican side, there have also been some people that have expressed some sympathy for cash payments during the pandemic. They haven't, and actually some of them have even been open to universal basic income. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the political force and momentum behind it is growing. One of my great concerns, Jill, is that you have a number of things in American life now where a lot of people are for them, but the government doesn't do anything.
Right.
And so I'm now getting increasingly concerned that our government is not actually responsive to popular will for a variety of reasons. And that's one thing I want to try and fix, because you can identify other things where it's like, well, most of us agree on common sense gun safety regulations, or like the need to improve our infrastructure, or some form of climate change mitigation. And we're not doing any of those things. And so that's another set of problems to tackle that I'm actually now seeing more clearly.
And do you think it's just because bureaucracies take a long time to change? Do you think it's because UBI actually all of the things that you're really strongly advocating for are major shifts in our thinking, like the individual owning their digital property, I think conceptually is a very difficult thing for us to think about, even though Americans tend to like the notion of privacy, that we don't really understand what a competitive asset it is to have our own, to have access to and allow access to digital information. And so these are big thoughts that you have. And do you think that it just takes time for bureaucracy to catch up? Or do you think that things like COVID-19 and the dramatic impact it's had on Americans just opens up a door that maybe would have taken a lot longer to open.
Well, we certainly have an opening that I want to try and maximize.
Yeah.
Dozens of members of Congress sponsored an Emergency Money for the People Act, and millions of Americans got those stimulus checks of $1,200 and liked it.
Right.
so, so, so we definitely have an opening.
Yeah.
But there's also the fact that again, there are a lot of political incentives now, Jill, around blaming the other side than solving the problem.
Yeah.
And the clearest example of that right now is the lack of a second coronavirus relief bill, where it's common sense to all of us that if the benefits ended in July and it's November, and you still have millions of people who are displaced, that we should do something. And at this point, the Dems and Republicans have just shrugged and said, well, it's their fault, rather than accept a bill that maybe isn't quite to their liking. So that's the stuff that concerns me when you talk about, like, there's the big thought. But even if people have the thought where, let's say 82% of Americans think we should probably do something to help people during the pandemic, and then you look up and you see the gridlock in Washington.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of barriers for us to surmount.
Just to kind of help people who are listening to this or watching this understand, we're talking about before COVID, 75% of Americans had less than $1,000 in savings, and 35% had no savings at all. And you talked a lot about, and we hear this a lot, that there are many, many Americans who are one, disaster away from just being completely in debt. COVID has exacerbated that. It's part of what, we've seen deeply happening in Chelsea, Mass, which is, a great example and maybe one of the deepest examples of how hard hit a community can be by something like COVID-19. How, now that the elections presumably passed us, how do you think things will loosen up and those conversations will become easier? And how dramatic do you think things will look on the recovery side? And how do you think both sides will think about this, knowing that we're all Americans and we're all facing kind of this massive challenge? Also, that there's so many Americans who want to lean in and help and are not receiving great direction on how to do that.
This is one reason I'm moving to Georgia, because in vision number one, you have a unified government, and then we're all trying to dig our way out, which is, to me, what we should be doing.
Right.
Like, anyone who doesn't think we should have a robust legislative agenda right now is not paying attention. We have like a multi-trillion-dollar hole in the economy. We have millions of displaced and unemployed. We have deprivation skyrocketing all over the place. And right now, cities and states and nonprofits are having trouble making ends meet themselves. And so they're looking around thinking, oh, maybe I have to lay some people off, which is exactly the last thing you want on top of everything else. So that's why I feel so strongly about trying to have a unified government, because if you do have Mitch McConnell saying no, no, no to everything, then it's going to be hard to do some of the big things that we should be doing right now. Even if we had a unified functional government, this would not be a good time. This would still be a very, very difficult time.
Right.
But we are taking a terrible time and making it more terrible through inaction and dysfunction. It breaks my heart. It makes me angry. It makes me sad. But I'm a person. I'm a problem solver. So it's like, okay, here are the problems. Like, what can I do?
Right.
So like
Right.
I keep trying to jam myself into a useful position. So right now the useful position is Georgia. We can, and I will say these special elections are going to be difficult races for Dems. Like, traditionally, Dems have not performed as well in special elections in Georgia.
Why is that?
I think a lot of it's that Democratic voters just don't think to vote in January, like a very high level. And I think conservatives are somehow more keyed in Georgia. At least this has been the pattern. Like, there was one race, and this was a little while ago, and Stacey Abrams has changed things in Georgia, and the demographics have changed. But there was a race that was like 3% in the first election, and then when it went to special, the Republican won by 15 points. so that's an example of,
That's
like,
so interesting. Can you do mail-in ballot for a special election?
There are absentee ballots that you can apply for. I think literally starting this week.
Yeah.
So that allows folks to mail it in.
So how will you be critical down there? Obviously, your presence, your people are attracted to you, and so they'll listen to what you're saying. What do you think is key about you showing up and other folks who have a national presence, a national democratic presence, being present there at this time?
So I think I can add value by trying to activate some folks to vote and pay attention that might not have otherwise.
Yeah.
For example, some young voters, Asian Americans are about 5% of the population in Georgia. So if I can activate them, great.
Mm-hmm.
If my even just knocking on a door myself and posting it on social media like helps someone see like, wait a minute, like why is Andrew in Georgia? Like what's going on?
Right.
That I can get more resources to this campaign, because this is going to be essentially a mini national campaign where there are going to be hundreds of millions spent on both sides.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
It's wild. I mean,
Yeah.
like, when's the last time you've seen a race that this much relies on, or these two races? But that like it's, and
Yeah.
one of the Republican members is literally the richest senator, which is saying something because there are a lot of rich senators in the Senate.
Yeah. Right. Doesn't
But
hurt.
Kelly Loeffler is worth over $500 million, and she's already spent 23 million of her own money on this campaign. So,
Mm.
so that there's going to be a lot of money spent.
Yeah.
So I think having human beings knocking on doors and canvassing and whatnot could be a difference maker.
Yeah, interesting. We spent a lot of time at the foundation also thinking about COVID-19 and the need for testing and the need for kind of a comprehensive set of protocols around getting kids back to school, which also helps get people back to work. How much of this solution, in addition to bringing funding to people who need it, how much of the solution is really to knock out this disease? We've been fighting about whether or not we need to knock out COVID-19. It feels to me like that should have been the enemy that we had the eye, that was where our eye was back in March and April. And instead we decided to fight amongst ourselves about whether or not that was important. How important do you think, now or post January, it's going to be to just get everyone's eye on the ball in terms of, eradicating that disease so that we can kind of move the economy forward?
I'm sure you saw the news come out today that there's a vaccine in late stage
Yeah.
trials that may be very, very promising.
Yeah.
So that there are essentially two stages of this in my mind. Well, three you could say, but we passed stage one essentially immediately. So stage one would have been actually contact tracing and trying to keep infection rates under control by finding the outbreaks. So we missed that window thanks to ineptitude in our government response. So that was very sad. So then we
Yeah.
moved into community mitigation, which is where we've essentially been ever since. So that's mask wearing and social distancing and various precautions and PPE. Resources for schools make sense, obviously, like having people have masks and shields and various things that could help you operate in that setting. And then stage three would be actually having a vaccine and distributing it. So right now, now that we're in stage two, people are making really difficult trade-offs where using schools as an example. I'm a parent. I've got two kids who are in online school. It's not great, and I
No
feel
way.
and I feel very deeply, just as I know you do, Jill,
Yeah.
that the kids who needed school most, are the ones who are just falling behind now because we can't get them into school.
Yeah.
And there's a real cost to that. Like that trade-off is very real and painful.
Yeah.
And so to me, helping very important institutions like schools operate safely would be the main priority during this time, and then trying to get to stage three where you actually have a vaccine in hand and can distribute it effectively is the hope. And it seems like that light may be actually appearing at the end of the tunnel sometime next year.
Yeah. And then, so do you think then there's this parallel path where we're both providing funding to help our most vulnerable population while the economy rebuilds and jobs come back? I mean, part of what we're seeing in Chelsea is that there are so many people who would be working right now who have lost their jobs because they worked for restaurants or for hotels or for the airlines. And they're just out of work, and they're going to be out of work until we live in a safer environment, because those things aren't going to open, right? But it's kind of black and white for a lot of those folks, is they either can work every day and afford food and shelter and their basic human needs, or they can't. And then they're a bit flailing, and many of them don't qualify for federal supports. And so, this is a massive struggle, and it's a massive struggle that's happening across America. And so, at some point we will 100% get the disease under control. But then, do you think the economy comes back swiftly or slowly? And do you think part of that is just, or depends on how seriously we focus on things like universal basic income and other supports that are not so structured, and really give people the freedom to kind of make investments where they need to for their own health and well-being?
We should have adopted universal basic income early on in this pandemic and kept all these families afloat because of what you just
Yeah.
described. Like
Yeah.
if you're a bartender, security guard, restaurant worker, airline attendant, retail worker in a mall that has prematurely shut down, and everything else, like you're in the situation you described where it's like, look, if I could work full weeks, then I could survive. And
Yeah,
now I
100% they
cannot.
would. Yeah.
Yeah. And that one of the misconceptions is that somehow the economy would turn back on like a light switch. I mean, that's just not the way it works at all.
Right.
Even with the vaccine, it will not actually turn on like a light switch, because people's habits have changed, and their commutes and patterns have changed. And not everyone's going to adopt the vaccine. I mean,
Right.
you can look around, like it's not like 100% of Americans are wearing masks. So you think that if you have a vaccine, like 100% of people will sign up for it.
Right.
There was actually a great suggestion on Freakonomics the other day that I'm going to try and popularize, which is that we should have like vaccine lotteries where like everyone who gets a vaccine in any given day, like there'll be a prize. Like one of you gets, $100,000 for getting a vaccine today to sort of like like reward people
That would be
for
interesting.
vaccine.
It's not a bad idea, because it is going to be a whole series of things that get us back in past where we were in a positive way. And the other thing is that we people need to understand what the new pathway is, right? Because like you said, we don't look the way we did before this crisis.
No.
We're looking at we're measuring lots of things around this UBI project that we have in Chelsea. And one of the things we looked at was mental health. And, in Chelsea, 30% of the respondents suffer from mental health issues. We had them take kind of a test that looks at mental health. That's as compared to 5% nationally. So you just look at what the impact has been on people's well-being. And so there's a whole other thing alongside of the economy and academically that we need to nurture and bring back to where it was, and where it wasn't even terrific. And so the country has a ton of healing to do. And do you think that's the key responsibility that President-elect Biden will take on as he moves us to and through the next 4 years?
Uh, this is one of the things that I find very frustrating, Jill, is that a lot of our politics has devolved into messaging, where when the media talks about someone being a healing figure, it's essentially for that person to present calming, unifying demeanor and avoiding particular rhetoric. But if you have 30% of people in a town like a mental illness, I mean, sure, it's better not to have someone on the news like braying about nonsense. I mean, like that'll help at the margin.
True.
But that doesn't somehow fix the traumatized kid who's not been in school for a year. That does not fix the traumatized parent who's been struggling. And one reason I'm so passionate about universal basic income is that if you were to lift the existential dread that parent has, then maybe both that child and that parent actually do recover,
Right.
marginally or faster or whatnot. But in the media, the conversation is just around the media itself. Where it's like the big problem we have is that people aren't measuring the reality on the ground of the lived experience of families day to day,
That's right.
where we've been slipping backwards in various measures of social progress or well-being, including mental health. This was all pre-COVID.
Hmm.
So things like infant mortality or freedom from substance abuse and addiction or whatnot, we're something around 28th globally if you take a composite of these things. Clean water,
Right.
and I'm sure COVID has made it much, much worse. And that to me has to be the test for Joe and the new government. That's one reason why the challenge is so great. And especially again, if you don't have a unified government, it's like, how do you reach those people in Chelsea, Mass,
Right.
if you're in DC and you're trying to get them help?
Yeah.
And the obvious answer is like, we should be sending them money because then they'd have a much better chance of plugging back into something productive, being able to pay their bills. That money would flow back through the community and the economy.
That's right.
And this has been my mission for the last number of years. We made incredible progress, but I still see how much progress there is to be made before that family in Chelsea actually gets the money. And thank God for your organization, and your commitment, because now maybe that family in Chelsea is getting money, but then there are like the thousand other Chelseas in the United States
That's right.
where there's not a Shah Family Foundation. and
No, I
that,
think you're exactly right. I mean, I was talking to Chris Hughes about this, who is a huge proponent of UBI, as you know. And I mean, I said, what's the point at this now, right? Because all of these things, pushback that you get around UBI, those things have been proven to be untrue, right? Like, people do spend the money responsibly. It does have an impact on their lives. And his point of view is that we just need to keep doing this and keep supporting these programs as they roll out in cities. To create momentum around it, right? So that, like you said, now 55% of people know what UBI is. It's because of you. And I think, so not in sound bites, but in real stories, we need to share, how impactful this is for our neighbors, right? And how this really does shift the dynamics of the country, how it's good for all of us.
yeah, if we can get it to a point where someone actually knows someone who's
Yeah, who's
who's
getting it
received
right?
something.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
because right now so many Americans have had their uh, gaze sort of brought down or depressed. It's like if you go to them and say, "Hey, you should be living better, you should be getting money maybe from the government or or just for a living or whatnot." It's literally too good to be true for them. Like they can't even get their eyes up to a point where they see that as a possibility.
Right.
And
Right.
that's our challenge in many ways. Because when I was running, I ran into that challenge a lot. One of the things I'm going to try and incept for you, because like I know you and I are going to be fighting this fight for a while, but this helped me, and maybe this will help listeners.
Yeah.
Uh, that it was a neuroscientist in Seattle who said to me, "The enemy of universal basic income is the human mind." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, as humans, we're programmed for resource scarcity. It's kind of
Right.
evolutionarily like baked into us, and we're
Right.
raised that way. And so, if someone says, 'Hey, everyone should get this money,' then everyone has this knee-jerk scarcity reaction,
Right.
where you think like, 'Oh, that's impossible. Where you get that money, there's not enough to go around.' And then it goes to, won't that hurt people? Won't that cause all these problems?
Right.
Won't they spend it in bad ways? Like that's kind of almost um, like a knee-jerk reflexive reaction based on our wiring
Right.
as a species, that we felt like there's never enough to go around. It's only in relatively recent times that you could argue, we're in a situation of abundance rather than scarcity.
Right.
So this neuroscientist's observation kind of helped me understand the objections a little bit better, because you just have to try and bring someone from a resource scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset very, very hard. But
Yeah.
it becomes easier if they actually see it. If they
That's
see it,
right.
then they're like, "Oh, it is possible."
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I could talk to you for a really long time. It's really interesting to have this opportunity to chat with you. But I think that's a great place to end our conversation, is that we really do need to shift away from net zero thinking, that we're in a time where net positive opportunity is absolutely true. You're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. We both know that you can take $1 and make 100 or 1,000 or $1 million from it with the right investments. And that's the way we need to be looking at this moving forward. So,
yes, that's the abundance mindset, the
yes.
entrepreneurship mindset. Love it so much.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's where Americans like to be too. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate spending time with you.
Of course, anyone who does the work like you do, I'm a huge fan of. Please consider me a friend and ally and resource. There aren't enough of us, but there are more of us coming into being every day because people are realizing that this is not just possible but necessary.
I think that's right. Well, thank you. Thank you for heading to Georgia. We'll be watching you and cheering for you, and looking forward to see what you head into the new year doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Andrew Yang. I hope that you enjoyed today's podcast. And if you did, please rate, review, like, and share it with your friends. Have a great day.